Hello, this is Jerry Morton. Welcome to the second season of my podcast series titled Finding My Way, a memoir by Jerry Morton. This is podcast 64, titled Frustrations Abound. Frustrations Abound relates my disappointment with the loss of various employment opportunities I thought I had secured before leaving the Army and my last-minute difficulties in actually leaving the Army. Podcast 64, Frustrations Abound. Closing out my active duty service at the Psychological Warfare School, Special Warfare Center, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, in the short amount of time provided me that June of 1969, was complicated and complex. My days were filled with closing out tasks at the PSYOP Center and getting all of the required paperwork for out-processing completed. One big hurdle was cleaning our on-post housing quarters to a level that passed the required inspection. Anna, my wife, worked very hard cleaning the living quarters. The task was made more difficult for her by having to care for our 1-year-old son all day. There was a cleaning service we could and did hire, but the word was that you still had no guarantee that you would pass. If you didn't pass it, the Army would not allow you to terminate. You had to do whatever additional cleaning they told you to do. What a headache that would be. Where would we live? The moving company the Army hired to take our belongings was scheduled to pack us up just a couple of days before my discharge date. It was a relief to have a job to go to immediately upon my discharge. Of course, we did not have a place to live in Houston, so we could not tell the moving company where to send our belongings. Fortunately, most of the furniture in our duplex was Army issue. We would be able to sleep in the duplex until the last day of active duty. However, the Army had told us that even if we did not pass the cleaning inspection of our quarters, we could not stay in them after that date. In the middle of this seemingly impossible set of tasks I had to complete in the 2-week time frame, I got a devastating phone call. The corporate recruiter, Joe, called me from Houston, Texas, to say that the strategic planning group's starting date had been postponed for a year. The CEO of the corporation had announced that he thought the stock market was going to decline in the coming year. He wanted to wait a year before starting the project. Joe kept saying how sorry he was to give me this news. The corporation would gladly reimburse me for any expenses I had encountered throughout the recruitment process that hadn't already been covered. All I needed to do was to send him an itemized list of what each expense was, and the corporation would issue me a check. In an agitated voice, I stated that I had a wife and a 1-year-old son, would be out of the Army with no job in 8 days, and hardly enough time in the day to deal with all of the Army's paperwork, in addition to finding a place to live and now trying to find a job. I had no time to prepare an itemized list of expenses I encountered over the multi-month period. Joe urged me to stay in touch with him. The corporate strategic planning project was going to happen, and they would still want me to be a part of the strategic planning team. I said I would. As I hung up, the last thing on my mind was staying in touch with Joe. I immediately called the Director of Psychological Services for the Pinellas County School System in the hopes that he still had a school psychologist position open for me. He said that he did not have one immediately open, but he might have one open up a little later. He wanted to call me back in a few days. The only safe thing for me to do was to see if I could get my internship position back that I had declined a few weeks earlier. That was through the School Psychology Master's Degree program at Miami University of Ohio. I planned to call the director of the university program the first thing the next morning. It was going to be a hard call to make. He had not been happy that I had called him a couple of weeks ago to tell him that I was not going to do an internship. The morning came. I placed the call. After explaining my situation, the director told me that all of the internship positions had been assigned. He could not place me in an internship. He was sorry, but wished me luck. It was a short phone call. With just 1 week to go before the discharge date, it was clear I could not complete all of the paperwork in time. The commanding officer of the Psychological Warfare Center gave his permission for me to stop teaching from the platform. I was free of any duties to the center. I did have to clear out my office, but that was all. The Special Warfare Center assigned me a Jeep and a driver to take me to all of the places I needed to go to fill out forms. Fortunately, the driver was a sergeant who had assisted others with the exit process. Since he knew the Army system, I asked him to take my forms into the various offices he would drive up to and get them processed for me. He agreed to do that. He said he knew most of the sergeants who handled the paperwork in the various offices. He would explain my situation and get them all working to expedite the process. It was working. He would drive me up to the front of some building, tell me what papers needed to be processed, grab my growing folder of completed paperwork, and rush into the building. A little later, he would return saying all went well as he started the Jeep and we rushed off to another building. Things kept happening. We passed the living quarters cleaning inspection. What a relief. The moving van pulled up to our house. I told the driver that we still didn't know where I would get a job, so we didn't know where our stuff should be sent. He said the moving company could store it indefinitely. We didn't need to worry about that. Oh, I called the school psychology guy for Pinellas County Schools. He still didn't have an opening for me, but would continue to work on it. Hopefully, he could give me some good news in a few days. I was to call him back. We would stay with Anna's aunt in Harrodsburg, Kentucky, until my work situation got settled. 2 days and a wake-up. 2 days and a wake-up to go. I rushed into my office at the PsyOps Center. I had an hour or two at the most to clean out my office. There were some books people had given me about Vietnam that they thought would help me with my courses on my bookshelf. Unfortunately, I never had time to read them. All I ever had time for was obtaining and understanding the material that directly applied to the purpose of each course. I just piled things into a few boxes and carried them to the car. During one of the box-carrying trips to the car, someone told me that my name was on the duty roster for my last night in the Army. I was to be the Officer of the Day, the OD, for the Special Warfare Center. That meant I had to stay up all night with a couple of sergeants overseeing the guard posts for the night, make various delivery requests of the major overseeing the whole operation. He was my commanding officer for the night. Sometimes there were 4 or 5 special tasks required of the officer of the day. Immediately, I went to the office of the captain responsible for making the duty assignments. I was mad. Why had she put me on the duty roster for that night of all nights? Well, she explained, that duty roster had been posted 2 weeks ago, and she assumed that I would swap nights with one of the other lieutenants for an earlier night. Didn't she know that the last 2 weeks would be so busy for me that there would be no time for me to do that? I still wasn't sure I was going to get all of the paperwork done in time anyway. If I messed that up, there was no telling how long I would have to stay in the Army. Due to the fouled-up paperwork mess that would follow, I shouted at her. Well, she speculated, I would have to find a way to deal with my responsibilities. I just could not ask one of my lieutenant friends to all of a sudden become the officer of the day with 1 day's notice and no way to pay them back. I couldn't do that to them. They had families and responsibilities. I just could not do that to them. My last night in the Army was going to be an all-nighter. I would have to serve my last night in the Army as officer of the day. After clearing my office, finding out about being OD, officer of the day, my Jeep driver said we had enough time to make another paperwork run before all of the offices closed. We rushed off. Arriving at the front of this large building, the sergeant stated that this last set of papers to get approved shouldn't take too long. That was a relief. I was getting stressed. The thing about the OD had just about pushed me over my emotional edge. After several long minutes, the driver came back. He said he couldn't get the papers approved. The top sergeant there said that the Army had issued a new form for the stuff that had to be approved. Well, the solution seemed pretty obvious to me, and I stated it. Well, the sergeant said that the old form was AR number. In my agitated state, I was not about to mentally register whatever numbers were being repeated. The sergeant went on to say the new form, RA number, had not been issued yet. So when will the new form be issued? Was my obvious question. The top sergeant didn't know. That was it. I lost it. You mean I will have to stay in the Army for an unknown length of time just because that guy does not have the new form? The driver quietly responded, Yes. Give me that damn folder, I demanded. I ran up the stairs to the building and went straight into the top sergeant's office. What's this about not having the new form to process me out of the Army? I shouted with my face in a full flush. That's right, sir. I can't use the old form, and they haven't issued me the new ones yet, he calmly replied, looking at me from his desk. That was it. I screamed, You're going to keep me in this blankety Army for an unknown length of time because of a new form? I'm not going to take this. This is it. I will go to the commanding general. I have worked my ass off for this place. I've done everything asked of me with distinction. Full colonels and generals have praised my work. They know who I am. This will not stand. I'm going after people. Calmly, the sergeant looked at me. A few silent seconds passed between us. Finally, he spoke. Sir, I didn't realize this meant so much to you. I will sign the old form. You will be a civilian in 2 days in a wake-up. With that, he signed the old form and handed it to me. More calmly, I replied, Thank you, Sergeant. "You're welcome, sir." He saluted me. I returned the salute and left. Early in the evening of my Officer of the Day activities, a senior major from the PSYOP school came in to sign out for a few days from the fort. When he walked in, I and the two sergeants with me immediately stood to attention and saluted him. He saluted back. "What are you doing here, Jerry? Today is your last day. I thought you became a civilian tomorrow morning." "That's right, sir," I replied with a big smile. After explaining the foul-up about being assigned to OD for tonight, under the assumption that I knew about it and would trade with someone to avoid being OD on this night, the major said, "You have really made a significant contribution to the Army with your work, and to think you were always a citizen soldier. It is just outstanding. I want to thank you." With that, he held out his hand. We shook. I valued him a great deal. Coming from a senior officer I had always admired, made his words all the more meaningful to me. Immediately after the major left, the two sergeants told me they would handle the desk so that I could sleep that night on the cot in the other room. If something came up that needed my attention, they would wake me. I slept through the night. In the morning, we shook hands. I went back to our duplex. That morning, Anna and I finished packing the car with everything we needed to survive the next few weeks. With our clothing, our maps, baby supplies, dog food, and a whole bunch of other stuff, including the dog, the 1-year-old boy, and the two of us, we had the car packed to the middle of the windows. I had changed out of my uniform and was in my civilian clothes. There was just one more thing I needed to take care of. Since I was no longer in the Army, I needed to remove the officer's reflective identification bumper sticker from the back bumper of the car. The post rules were very strict about this. Only active duty officers could have the sticker on their cars. That sticker and only that sticker allowed the vehicle on post. It was hard to get off. I couldn't just peel it off. I had no tools to use. Everything like that was packed in the moving van. In the end, I got a quarter and used it to scrape as much of the sticker off as I felt was needed. It wasn't all off by a long shot, but you could tell that a meaningful attempt to remove it had taken place. At last, we started the car. We were leaving Fort Bragg in the Army. I was really leaving the Army. They were not going to declare my military occupation classification as critical and keep me in. I was free. Well, free of active duty for now. They had declared my military occupation classification as critical. That meant that I could be called back to military service on a 24-hour notice for the next 3 years. However, I did not have to attend any Army Reserve meetings during those years. All I had to do was to let the Army know where I lived and how to immediately contact me if they decided to call me back. We could see the main gate marking the entrance and exit for Fort Bragg. The 4-lane road was practically empty of cars at this hour of the morning. The gate to the civilian world was in sight, just a tenth of a mile or so, and then I was really out of the Army. No, a military police car was right behind me with its lights flashing. I pulled over to the side of the road and got out of the car, as did the MP. In a sharp, commanding voice, the young corporal said, "What's going on here?" I don't understand. What did I do wrong?" Why are you driving a car with an officer sticker scratched up like that? I was just leaving the Army. As of this morning, I am no longer in the Army. I've been PSY for the last 2 years as a lieutenant. I tried to scrape off the sticker this morning. I didn't have any tools to do it fully. We have lived in the officers' housing section on post until this morning. You can see this car is packed. We are leaving. Well, I can't let you drive on post with a defaced officer sticker. You will have to completely remove it now. I took out my quarter and began scraping. About 40 minutes later, I had scraped enough of it off that the MP was satisfied. He wished me good luck in my civilian life. I thanked him, got in the car, and drove the remaining 1,000 yards or so to the Fort Bragg gate and into the civilian world. When we arrived at Anna's aunt's home in Harrodsburg, my plan was to immediately call the head of the School Psychological Services Department for Pinellas County Schools. Maybe he would have an opening by then.